Hey, what's going on? So today we're going to look at Codewars Q7 problem build a square. So let's look at what the problem actually wants you to do. So it says, I'll give you an integer and give me back a shape that is long and wide as the integer. The integer will be a whole number between 1 and 50. Great. So for example, if they give you an integer 3, then you get back a 3 by 3 of pretty much any character, but let's just keep them to pluses, right? So you get 3 pluses wide, 3 pluses long. So essentially what we're doing is we're building a matrix. So the way I like to do it is generally I write out the pseudocode, and then from there we explore the different options of how we can actually solve this problem. So usually the first thing I do in my pseudocode is I like to write out the objective, okay? Let's give ourselves some space over here and let's write out the objective. So objective is to make sure that I understand what it is that the function wants me to do. So create a matrix of, we're gonna stick with pluses. That is integer times wide and tall, right? So for example, if integer is 3, then it's 3 times wide and 3 times tall. Okay? Just like we see over here. All right. So what are the steps that we can do? So let's think this through. First of all, we're going to create a long string, okay? And how do we know and we know how we can break up a string into different lines. That's with the new line character, right? With this escape character right here, right? So essentially what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to let's write out our steps. Let's first initialize an empty string, okay? Initialize empty string. Okay, that's where we're going to keep adding our pluses as much as we need. So as soon as there are integer number of pluses in string in str, add a new line character like that. Okay, so how can we do that? There's a few ways we can do that, but the way that we're going to look at today is going to be with, let's first start with our good old for loop. Okay, for, and so essentially what we're going to need to do is loop through 0 till integer, right? And add pluses as long as the index is between 0 and integer. Okay? Once the index equals integer, we're going to need to add, like we wrote over here, a new line character. Okay? How can we do that? We can do that with a nested for loop. So we're going to need a loop within another loop. So for, and I'll show you why. For I equals 0. Okay, we're initiating our loop. And I is less than integer. Okay? And I plus plus. So here what we're going to want to do is open a new loop so we can add, this will be clear in just 1 second. J is also less than integer because we want as wide as we want high. J plus plus, and open a new loop. Okay, so what is happening over here? What's happening is that, oh, we accidentally closed that. Okay, what's happening is that this is going to be the inside loop is going to be responsible for wide, and the outside loop is going to be responsible for tall. Meaning, practically speaking, let's first start on the inside, and let's add wide as many characters as we need. So for j is 0, and 0 is less than integer, so let's say 3. For every single index, what we want to do is we want str that we initialized, or didn't initialize yet, and are initializing now, str equals an empty string. We want str to add a plus. Okay, so if integer is 3, right? Sorry, I added equal. If integer is 3, so there are going to be now 3 pluses in here. Okay, and at that point, what do we want to do? We want to open a new line, and we want that to happen as many times as our integer. Okay, so how do we open a new line? We go out to this external loop, which is responsible for how tall your matrix is, and we can say str plus equals to new line. Okay, so that's going to give us tall, three lines, and that's going to give us a wide, 3 pluses. Okay, and after all that is done, let's return str. Okay, and let's see what that gives us. Let's actually run this, and it's going to give us a big fat error. Okay, why does it give us a big fat error? Well, let's actually analyze what's going on. Okay, so we have this is what we returned, and this is what they expected it to be. So what's the difference between these two strings is that at the end of ours we actually have a new line character, but we don't want that to happen, right? Because at the very end we don't want a new line, we just want to return it the way it is. So at this point we can start doing some fancy JavaScript and say, oh, at the very last iteration, right? At the very last iteration, don't add. So we can add an if statement over here, or we can, at this point, I like to actually just search Google for the simple words of, exactly what it is you're looking for. So usually on Stack Overflow, you'll find, or some article, one of the first few articles in Google, you'll find the solution to what you're looking for. So what we're going to search for is how to remove a new line character from the end of a string. Okay, exactly those words. Why? Because that's exactly what we're trying to do. If that doesn't help us, then we can think about doing fancy JavaScript. But for now, let's say remove line break. Actually, as you see, I already searched it before. At the end of string JS, right? JavaScript. And what do we get? The very first, like I said, I already searched this before, obviously in preparation for this video, but the very first result gives you remove line breaks from start and end of string in JavaScript. Great, that's exactly what we want. And what do they say? They say use the trim method to remove the line breaks from the start and the end. Examples, str trim. Great. Literally a sentence into this article, we already have our answer. So what can we do? Now that we have our string that we're returning, we can just call the trim method on it. And let's see if that works. Let's test it. And everything goes through perfectly. Now, that is option 1. I want to also show you a couple of more options for writing this function in a slightly more efficient way. Rather than nesting for loops and so on and so forth, we can actually use, since we're working with strings, we can use string methods, right, that are specific to strings. So let's go ahead and delete all that, okay? And let's search online. What do we know that we need to do? Exactly in line with the last with the pseudocode that we wrote before, we need to repeat the plus sign this amount of time, integer amount of times, right? And then we need to also do the same thing, tall, also integer amount of times. Okay, so how can we do that? So first, let's start with wide. JS repeat string X amount of times. Like I told you before, I literally search exactly the words that I'm trying to do, and I'm sure something will come up. And in similar fashion, the very first article will give us exactly what we're looking for. So somebody's answering here. Sorry, this is someone's question, and this is the first answer. Obviously, if it has a green check, that means it is the best answer. So it says, these days, the repeat string method is implemented almost everywhere. So unless you need support older, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the string dot repeat the amount of times we need it repeated, right? And that's going to give you, like they're showing over here, that's going to give you, oh, actually they're showing you a different way of also doing the same thing, which we can actually use this as a different way as well. But first we're going to try out this method. Okay, so string dot repeat and the amount of times you want it repeated. Let's try that out. So what do we have? We have our generate shape. What do we want to repeat? we know that we want to repeat the plus. How many times we want to repeat it? We want to repeat it. We want to repeat it integer amount of times. Okay? So far so good. Let's actually go ahead and return that and see what it gives us. So test, that's obviously going to be wrong. But so far, what does it give us? It gives us, from this test, they want to generate shape 8 times. What does it give us? It gives us 8 pluses. So that's a good start because we have the amount of pluses wide that we want. So all we need to do now is worry about pluses tall. Okay, how many rows do we want? We also want from this specific call, generate shape 8, we want 8 rows. Right, so how do we do that? Well, the same way we did with the for loops, we can also add the escape character. Okay, let's add the escape character, and we need to simply repeat this line. Apologies. We need to repeat this line. Same idea, we need to repeat it integer amount of times, right? So what do? We added a new line, a line break, right? Which is going to give us a matrix. And then again, we do repeat that integer amount of times, right? Simple as that. Now let's return it. And at this point, you're going to see again an error. And you're going to see again back to where we started earlier, right? You're going to see a line break at the end. Why? Because we added this to every single row. So at this point, you should already know how to deal with that. And since we already know how to deal with that, we know that all we need to do is call trim on that entire string, and that should give us the answer that we're looking for. Excellent. So that went through. Now, we did see a different method over here. Right, so we did know that array with the amount of times that with the amount of spots you want to open in that array, and then you want to join it, right? You want to join it at, you want to join it with, in our case, it's going to be, this is essentially is going to join between every single array element. So this is only going to be in between. It's not going to be at the ends, like we had with the line break. So what do we know? We know that we want to join every single array of X amount, which is integer in our case. We want to join it with a line break. So let's actually try and do that. So let's get rid of all this. Okay, and we're going to try that method. Array. We know we want to open an array of integer amount of spots, right? And fill it with plus, and then how did they do it? Okay, so what do we want to fill that array with? Array of, let's say, in this case it's going to be 8, so essentially you're going to have an array with 8 spots. We want to actually fill those spots, okay? How do we fill it? We can actually use exactly that method that we spoke about earlier with the repeat, okay? So we can say fill that array of 8 spots. In this case, fill that array with 8 pluses, right? And, dot repeat integer, okay? And in the end, what do we want to do with that array? We want to join it with line breaks. And why does this help us? This helps us because, say for example, you have an array of 3. Okay, so you have an array of 3, and we have 3, I'm trying to write an array of 3, for example, right? So what happens with join? When we join this with line breaks, well, let's just say, for example, we have an array of 3 by 3, okay? Because this is what this is going to give us, okay? So an array of 3, and each and every single element within that array is going to get filled with that number of pluses, okay? So essentially, if you're calling generate shape 3, this is going to be, without the join, this is going to be the result. So we want to actually turn that into a matrix that is 3 wide and 3 tall. So if we go ahead and we join it with new line breaks, this is going to essentially give us a string that looks like this. Apologies, this should be like that. And there you go. That's going to be the result. And that's exactly what we want, because the join only joins in between the elements and doesn't actually add line breaks in the beginning and then the end as well. So let's actually test if that works. Moment of truth, let's test. And that works as well. Excellent.